Welcome to the Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. Not the greatest day for Steve Bannon. I assume that you know by now that the January 6th committee voted unanimously to find Bannon in contempt and to refer criminal contempt charges to the Department of Justice. Now, I mean, it's going to be a messy, long, drawn out process, but clearly shots were fired yesterday, and here is Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who is just, I mean, I'm sorry, Liz Cheney is just, this lady is not for turning. She is not backing down. And here's her description of Steve Bannon's central role in the insurrection on January 6th.
The day before this all occurred, on January 5th, Mr. Bannon publicly professed knowledge that, quote, all hell is going to break loose tomorrow, end quote. He forecast that the day would be, quote, extraordinarily different than what most Americans expected. He said to his listeners and his viewers, quote, so many people said, if I was in a revolution, I would be in Washington. Well, he said, this is your time in history. Based on the committee's investigation, it appears that Mr. Bannon had substantial advanced knowledge of the plans for January 6th and likely had an important role in formulating those plans. Mm-hmm. Mr. Bannon was in the war room at the Willard on January 6th. He also appears to have detailed knowledge regarding the president's efforts to sell millions of Americans the fraud that the election was stolen.
And then she had this little juicy comment about the former guy's lawsuit to try to block any of the testimony and the turning over of documents. This is what she had to say.
Mr. Bannon's and Mr. Trump's privilege arguments do, however, appear to reveal one thing. They suggest that President Trump was personally involved in the planning and execution of January 6th. And this committee will get to the bottom of that.
Personally involved. Well, to talk about all of this as well as just whatever else is happening, we are joined by Charlie Warzel, who writes the newsletter Galaxy Brain, previously worked as a writer at large for the New York Times opinion section, co-author of the forthcoming book Out of Office, The Big Problem and Bigger Promise of Working from Home. Charlie, thanks for joining us this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Charlie on Charlie action. And of course, you spent a lot of time deep in the swamps of right-wing media before you went to the Times, and also when you were at the time. I mean, you spent a lot of time reading and hanging out with these people, didn't you?
Yeah, a full immersion, basically, from I would say the middle of the 2016 election up until probably around 2020, around the end of the election. So basically the entire Trump presidency, I spent sort of enmeshed in that world to some degree, and it was taxing.
it was taxing. So did that fry your brain? I mean, really. I mean, I spent a lot of time doing it, and every once in a while I have to take a deep breath and go, I'm sorry, I'm just spending too much time in Crazy Town. It's bending me. I mean, you did it all the time.
Yeah, so a really interesting thing happens where you're able to sort of separate yourself, and it's not that you're sort of being brainwashed necessarily, but one thing that I did is I constructed like a separate Twitter account to follow, just to really dive into that universe. And what would happen over time is I actually, their talking points, their sort of rebuttals to, any mainstream news, whatever it is, would just sort of be lodged in my brain. Like my brain would come up with their talking points either, ahead of time. And that's useful as a journalist or a writer to sort of
know
anticipate
what they're thinking. Yeah.
But it also kind of, I'd just be having political conversations with friends or family, and I wouldn't say these things out loud, but they'd be in my brain. And there's a way in which you almost sort of wish that, it's very difficult to occupy those two spaces and try to actually get distance between, what you believe and sort of, the reality that's being constructed over by this other side.
Well, also, the danger is spending too much time online. You get a distorted view of reality. And right before we started this, I was telling you, I remember couple of years ago, I was at a public event. I think it was down in Texas, and speaking to a group of folks, and I was actually startled that they were so reasonable, logical, and normal. And then I realized, no, it was the fact that I'd spent so much time online that I'd gotten this view that everybody was a little bit crazy or hair on fire, and it was healthy to come up for air and see that, hey, the world is still going on. Not everybody is completely batshit crazy, but also to the extent to which, if you do spend time in that world, you are going to start to think there's two moons in the sky.
There's in my reporting, I traveled around quite a bit, and there was one time also in Texas, in Austin, I was covering this trial of Alex Jones, this
Oh yeah.
family trial that he had, and it was a kind of a window into who he was as a person. But at the same time, there was a gathering of sort of MAGA folks with a bunch of online, Trump sort of ringleaders at this hotel in Austin. And I went, and I just remember at the event, everyone just being super personable, super nice. It just felt like a normal, just, I don't know, like hanging out at a bar, right? And it was really disorienting to me because I'd talked to them, and it seemed in one sense that like they weren't having, like, they didn't feel as under threat, under attack. Like if they truly believed everything that they were saying, all the time online, you would think that these people would be, in their bunkers, always ready to go to war, etc. And it's sort of highlighted to the degree that, especially for some of these like online grifter folks who are, the pundits, that it really is a bit of a game, right? They're not as ideologically, under attack as they say they are. But also, that mixed with this feeling of, wow, these people are, can be charming. They can sort of,
Yeah.
try to play to your ego. I really would have to, step outside of those things, ground myself and sort of pin myself to reality, as it were.
Okay, so since we're talking about this, so what do these folks think about a guy like Alex Jones? And a guy like Alex Jones who goes on the air and alleging that the Sandy Hook shooting was, I don't know, was staged, or that it was, somehow a false flag event. I mean, what do they think about that when they hear that?
So this particular group, I would say, fell into, and a lot of them, revealed to me like, oh yeah, I spend a lot of time on 4chan and places like that. They're sort of the crew that they embrace Alex Jones with a wink and a nod, right? They
Okay.
kind of look at it as like, oh, it's such great entertainment, right? But the people that I talked to also said that over time, you watch Alex Jones during the middle of the workday because you're bored, and you go out of the webcast, and you're like, oh, let's see him rant about something, that'll be fun. And then, as many of them said, and they also said this about 4chan and some of the online message boards, and Twitter too, that you go there sort of as an ironic joke or to be entertained because
Huh.
you have a, this kind of weird online trolley, contrarian bent or whatever, or you like to see chaos. And then slowly over time, there is this indoctrination. And, some of them even said that. Like one guy I talked to told me about, he'd been on 4chan for about, at this party, he told me, probably since 2010 or 2012, sorry. And he said that, I don't even like some of the beliefs that I have now, but I can't not see them in my head. I can't not get away from them because I've
So
just been consuming so much of it. Uh, and the reason why they didn't like it is because they'd felt that those beliefs ostracized them from society. Like
justifiably so.
they couldn't talk to this guy said, I can't talk to my wife, right, about a lot of the
Okay.
things that I think. And it was such a interesting and kind of, deeply sad moment. And so, they find community here. And I think that
Huh.
that's one thing that I learned in a lot of this coverage is, when you're observing it from afar and you see this sort of alternate reality, it's hard sometimes for people to realize that there is a great sense of
A
community there. Like
community, right? It's belonging, right?
if you go to a Trump rally, it feels like a sports tailgate to some degree. Obviously, a very dystopian one, but the sense of community to them doesn't feel toxic. It doesn't feel, it feels good. It feels like home. It feels comfortable. And those people, I think, are genuinely there for each other. And it's, it's based around this really dangerous set of ideas and divorce from reality. But I think we always underestimate the sense to which that community is really load bearing to this entire movement.
So again, do they believe this? Do they pretend to believe it? Are they just entertained by it, or is that kind of an irrelevant question because it's all sort of this cloud that allows them to be part of the community?
I think it's kind of irrelevant in the sense, and this is actually
Mhm.
gets to a little bit of, since you mentioned the top
Yeah.
with the January 6th. When I look at that footage, if I, when I sort of roll through that entire day, through looking at social media, all the video, etc., all the reconstructions, I sort of see the entire movement in that,
Mhm,
which is,
mhm.
you do have this core of true believers, right? You have then, this group of sort of, um, they may not even be true believers, but they want to fight. There's a group of people who want to fight. They want conflict in whatever way because they are angry. They like to fight. Whatever it is, they feel good wearing the tactical gear, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think you have this group of people who are sort of there for the, that communal sense and that sort of, again, like liken it almost to like a sports tailgate or, just that sort of like fan frenzy. It's a cultural thing. It's part of
Huh,
their cultural identity. And I don't know that they are necessarily, I don't even know if anything really matters beyond dressing up, wearing
huh.
the clothing, really being together and making that sort of Trumpism a real part of your identity. I think there's obviously
Yeah,
some political affiliation there, but I don't know that, I don't know how strong the
this is
the
good,
the
yeah.
beliefs are. And
Okay.
then I think all those things act together, right? And what you saw on January 6th is all of that acting together. Like I believe that there are people, I've spoken to lots of people who were there and were sort of taken aback by what happened and they left, or there were some people who were on the outskirts and interpreted what was going on quite differently. I've spoken to people who, we did an investigation in the New York Times, all the cell phone data, and I ended up,
Yeah.
calling people. And there's a lot of those conversations we didn't publish because we did everything with people's permission. But, there were people who were, who we kind of caught caught by surprise on the phone, and I think it got into all of those different categories, right? The true believers, the fighters, the sort of the cultural people, the sort of like the clueless people who tag along and find themselves, enmeshed in this. I think it's everything. And January 6th was watching what happens when all of that kind of gathers in a critical mass. And this isn't to absolve any
No, no,
participant at
no.
all, but just to say that I think it's really nuanced. So, and I
Right.
think we focus so much on this idea of like what do people believe? Is this alternate reality, durable because they're brainwashed? And I think it's durable because it is there is part of a cultural identity to some people, and I think that is really, I think we
Crucial.
underestimate that still.
So where does someone like Steve Bannon fit into this ecosystem? I mean, you have, does I mean, look, he's a smart guy.
Mhm,
He is an experienced manipulator. There's a certain cynicism in the exploitation of some of these folks. You know, Alex Jones, whether he's an entertainer or whether he really believes this stuff. So where does Steve Bannon fit in right
mhm,
now? Because I mean, he clearly has decided he's positioning himself kind of at the head of all of this, going
mm.
on the air, and saying that Trump is going to be restored. Obviously, played a significant role in what happened on January 6th. So, give me your read on Bannon's role in creating this
Right.
whole ecosystem.
I mean, he's a sort of a PT Barnum type, right? Like he's the salesman, there's sort of an architect of the chaos, I think. I don't know what is within his heart, and frankly,
No,
I don't think it matters, but it does seem like his political project is embracing, total chaos, right? um,
yeah,
and I think that's what he sort of does. I think what is really hard about him is especially when, you're looking at the language that they're bringing up in the commission to, in order to hold him in contempt and try to, get him to come in. He's always using that kind of war language, right? Like when it came to the Trump campaign, like he's
Mhm.
just, he talks about reading all these, like art of war style books. He speaks in this kind of exaggerated way that I think, to some degree there's a there's a bit of a, who knows what he's saying, whether or not
Mhm.
that was part of, I am architecting a run on the Capitol as part of an election overturning insurrection, or if that's just the kind of language he uses and it's reckless and dangerous, and it can rile people up in that way. I don't know what it is, but I think he is somebody who employs that language because he wants that chaos. I think he truly believes in the destruction of the establishment.
Yeah, and this, of course, is what drew him to Trump, and he tried to impose some of his ideas on Trump, but obviously Trump likes that, likes certain elements of what Bannon is doing. So even though they had a falling out, clearly you kind of get the sense that they're kindred spirits, at least at the moment, or is that putting it too strongly?
I don't have any reporting on their current relationship, so I don't know. But I think, I mean, there's obviously probably the most kindred, or the thing between them that is the most similar is an absolute desire to
Yeah.
be in the spotlight, uh, and to sort of
Well,
be the face of this kind of movement in some way. I mean, I think
and they're there. Yeah.
Bannon's podcast is tremendously influential in that world, and he grew that up out of nothing, out of sort of, exile, and I think it's helped him continue to be a real ideological leader in that way, or at least sort of a motivator, right? He's definitely stokes and fans the flames on that. So I don't know if he's trying to get back in the good graces, or if he's actually more powerful sort of as his own voice outside of that world, and being kind of tangential to Trump. But I think the one thing that they share in common is an absolute, desire to make news.
So I've been reading your stuff for years, following it, kind of worrying about you. And
Thank you.
but there's a specific backstory to this conversation today. And so about 10 days ago, Brian Stelter from CNN tagged me on Twitter. I had written a piece, how alarmed should we be about the anti-democratic actions of the GOP. Tagged me on Twitter, and he wrote about it as well. And then you replied to Brian Stelter's tweet with this post from your Galaxy Brain newsletter. By the way, Galaxy Brain, that kind of raises expectations, doesn't it? I mean, aren't you? Like, I mean, and it's kind of hard. I mean, Galaxy Brain, really?
Well, it's it's an homage to a meme where it's basically like the hottest take that you can possibly have. So I thought I'd have a little fun with
That's
that.
pressure. That's a lot of pressure. So,
Yes,
okay,
true.
so you tagged us with a piece that you had written back in July called "We Are Not Ready," and in that post, which I found really extraordinary, you wrote about kind of a flashback to October 2020, a month before the election, when you were, and these are your words, seized with a deep, persistent dread that all the things you were seeing about civil conflict were a prelude to something bigger. So talk about that, because you write about this dark energy that you saw, and the videos posted of furious Americans taking to the streets, and militant groups on walkie-talkies, and surging gun and ammo sales, and you're just feeling that something was coming. But back then, before the election, you didn't write it because you thought you were overly alarmist. So tell me about, looking back at that, what you were thinking then, and what you're thinking now about that.
Yeah, October of 2020 was a sort of I guess it's not surprising in hindsight, but I was surprised at the time. I've usually been able to sort of give myself a little bit of professional remove
Mhm.
from what I cover in terms of, my sense of, so I immerse myself in the work so as not to be, as anxious maybe as I might be. And October 2020 was incredibly difficult for me, because I felt like it was just this constant series of alarm bells. I mean, I think I put in the piece, there's this great article in the Atlantic about the Oath Keepers, and
Hmm.
it mentioned the shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin, over the summer of
Hmm.
2020, and it mentioned how it went through a couple of situations that could have been similar to that, and how they were just kind of almost miraculously diffused, and it made me realize that there's just there's so much anger out on the streets, especially at that moment. There was so much, not only protest, but counter protest. And this sort of like, it felt like this simmering rage that was about to boil over. I spoke with a couple of scholars, and they were basically they were predicting what they were calling, and they still are, the turbulent 20s, which is that all these different indicators, economic inequality, all sorts of political unrest indicators are suggesting that this will be an incredibly turbulent, if not violent, decade, and
Oh,
that
great.
that
That's
came out
wonderful. Yeah.
around that time. Obviously, you have COVID just running through the country at that time, and in this way, no vaccines yet. Um, and people are just stuck inside, sort of warring on their keyboards. The president gets COVID. There's this, sort of what's happening with the line of succession and who's in control of the government. The election's coming. There's, the GOP is already laying the groundwork for what we ended up seeing with the whole, big lie. And I felt at this moment that every fiber, in my body was kind of crying out and saying, I feel like things are very untenable right now. That there is so much potential energy for conflict in whatever way. Um,
I think a lot of us at the time were wrestling with that, thinking, okay, things are bad. Actually, if you see what I'm seeing, it's way worse than you think it is. But you don't want to say that every day, right? So,
and well,
yeah,
I felt that because especially the perch that I was working from at the time, at the New York Times, it's a very big platform, and you want to the job is to give people a proportional sense of alarm when necessary, right? And to assuage fears when necessary. It's to try to give them an accurate perspective. And so I kept trying to write pieces, and everything. When I looked at it, I was like, this feels alarmist to me, in that sense. And I didn't pull the trigger on a couple of them because I felt that I'm not sure what's going to happen, and I certainly don't want to be the person on the hook of saying there's not going to be a peaceful transfer of power,
yeah.
or whatever it is. And so I didn't write about it.
So
And I
you
Yeah.
regret that now, and if I'm reading you correctly, you also see that failure to write it was also a window into how traditional conceptions and practices of journalism can break down in these amazing, extraordinary times.
Yeah, it's a term that a number of people kind of trot out, and the term is normalcy bias, right? That there is
Yeah.
in journalism often this bias toward seeing the time that you're in, or seeing the event that you are in, as or trying to find a reason for it to be normal, right? You're worried about being overly alarmist, painting something as super aberrant. And obviously, in the scope of history, really crazy things happen all the time. Really intense and violent and awful things happen all the time. So that actually is kind of normal. But we get, especially in the sort of in the realm of covering politics and media in this traditional world of trying to play within the bounds of normal and see things as, oh, well, maybe it just feels a little different, or maybe we're all a little bent out of shape. And I got to tell you, on January 6th, I'm sitting there, watching everything sort of in real time on Twitter and other platforms, and the first thing that pops into my head was, I mean, of course, this is where it was going. I knew that it was headed towards something, and that's when I sort of realized the sense of, among other emotions, the sense of regret in not better articulating the alarm that I had.
But there's also, I mean, I don't disagree with anything you just said here, but there's also the psychological desire to keep some sort of equilibrium, right? We know I asked you whether your brain had been fried by spending so much time on social media. I also think that, I mean, one of the things that worries me, I'll be really honest about it, is, watching in the media and social media and on cable television, the number of people, who just kind of have nervous breakdowns because of this. I mean, it's just they lose
Right.
their minds and they come off as hysterical and waving and his hair on fire every single day, and you really feel, "Hey, just could you." Yes, it's alarming, but you need to calm down. You need to not lose your mind. You know what I mean here? And so I find myself
Absolutely.
not trying to downplay it, but also I don't want to basically get sucked into the crazy vortex by becoming crazy myself. I kind of sense that's where you are at as well.
Yeah, I mean, I the a word that I think I used in the piece, but that I feel so much right now, a a problem with media in general at this moment is trying to get a good sense of proportion, right? A
Yeah,
proportional outrage, proportional alarm, proportional sense of calm, and that is, I feel like that is really one of the biggest struggles, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we get our news through channels that absolutely flatten and destroy a sense of proportionality, right? Everything
right.
is either, chill out, or this is the thing you must worry about today. It's a five alarm fire for the next 24 hours, and then you will never remember it happened again. And so I think it makes
Which
it
is our
really
world.
difficult if you are plugged into that system to step back and find that sense of proportionality. Uh, but I think also at the same time, it really it can, I step back too much in that moment.
Hmm.
Um, I think, and I didn't write what I felt, which was that, I think people should be on guard for some, truly unthinkable event. And I think January 6th qualifies as one
Yeah.
of those.
So going back to October, so about roughly 6 months after that, you left the New York Times to join Substack, and you're one of
Mhm.
us, the small dowdy band of people who are on Substack. But it's staying with you. You use a word that I don't think I've seen before. You use the term hyperobject to describe issues undergirding the sprawling,
Mhm.
complex problems out there. So talk to me about explain what you mean by hyperobject and how it plays into what we're talking about here.
Yes. There's a theorist named Timothy Morton who coined the term hyperobjects. And essentially, what it is it's a concept that's so all encompassing that it resists any specific description. And, you know, the best, probably most salient example of this is climate change, right? It's such a large problem that it's so complex that when we try to describe
It's too big.
certain
Yeah.
parts about it, it's almost hard to grasp the sense of urgency, right? And one of the best examples of this, right, is 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius of warming and the way it changes the planet. I mean, that's such a tiny change for the human mind. If you're not a scientist, if you're not sort of really well read into this stuff, you say, okay, yeah, it's a degree hotter, it's a 2 degrees hotter. And you don't really understand the ways in which all of these systems intertwine. And what you're talking about is, sea level rise that destroys the city of Boston, right? So it those kinds of hyper objects are incredibly difficult, especially for the press, to talk about and educate people on without either over sensationalizing or underplaying it. And I think that to me, when I first heard that term probably 2 or 3 years ago, it's been lodged in my mind ever since.
Mhm.
And I believe that right now, what makes, the 21st century, and especially the last, let's say, 7, 8, 10 years, so, you know, kind of brain scrambling, is the fact that I think we're confronted with a lot of hyper objects right now.
Maybe so is there a bandwidth of alarm that we just can't handle being alarmed about? Maybe we can handle 3 things to be alarmed about, but we can't handle 5 things, and particularly, we can't be alarmed about, multiple hyper objects at the same time. It's just too much, so you have to kind of go, I don't know. I don't know what to think. I don't know what to be alarmed about. And at some point, people shut down. I'm not just talking about journalists, but I'm also talking about
Yeah.
the public trying to decide. I wrote about something yesterday about the sort of the weaponization of right wing sheriffs, and I said something
Hmm.
like, "You're not nearly worried enough about this," and I got some blowback saying, what the fuck are you talking about? We're worried about everything. Constantly I'm reading about things I should be worried about, but I can only worry about so many things, and then I want to know what can I do about it all. So at
Hmm.
a certain point, if you're presented with too many alarming things, it exceeds the bandwidth and people shut down.
That's right. I encountered this pretty recently with a column I wrote about the debt ceiling. And I was trying to calibrate, the way I framed it was calibrate my own anxiety, right? How
Yeah,
worried
yeah,
do I need
right.
to be about this? And somebody replied to me about this and said, I just think normal Americans shouldn't have to worry about this right
Right.
now. Like it just and it spoke exactly to what you're saying, right? The number of things, but also the idea of what can I do about it? Yes,
Right.
I can call my congressperson and say, I want you to raise the the debt ceiling or get rid of it because this is, I don't
Mhm.
want the economy to head into an unforced error of a recession. But I think this is a real issue, and I think it's again is something that the press struggles with in terms of you do not want to overwhelm people to the point that they tune out, and
Right.
how do you kind of calibrate that? And I think solutions focusing on things where there are possible solutions is helpful, but with something like climate change, individual action is only going to go so far.
Right.
uh,
That
but you can use journalism as a way to pressure larger institutions that are sort of more glacial to make change. So it's a really tricky balance.
it is tricky. It's kind of the exploding sun syndrome, where at some point you realize, okay, the sun will someday go out, and all life as we know it will be extinct. But you know what? I'm just not going to worry about that this week. I have like 86 things, including the fact that I got have to get my car fixed and pay my taxes, and my kids need braces. So I'm just not going to worry about the sun going extinct or for all the other things that we have to worry about. So in your piece, you also, you talk about the hyper objects and how it scrambled journalists' brains, and then you point out that it doesn't help matters to learn that Tucker Carlson was a prolific source for political reporters in
Mhm.
D.C. I'd actually forgotten about that until I went back and looked at the notes about all of this. Tucker Carlson, who continues to sort of turn the dial up on outrage and conspiracy theories and racism and everything. And, what does that say about the media environment we live in, that apparently he's sitting around having drinks with DC reporters who use him as sources? And how bothered should we be by that?
Yeah, I so that column from my former boss, Ben Smith, was, I think is a sort of midsummer column, kind of floated a little more under the radar than I would have thought, or generated
Mhm.
less outrage, I should say, than I thought. On one hand, I understand. I covered the pro-Trump media for a long time. I had meetings with unsavory people, right? And there was actually, I wrote about this a long time ago, but I actually went back and reviewed in 2018 some of my coverage from the early part of the Trump administration and realized that I think I gave far too much of a platform to certain people, right? Let them sort of say what they wanted to say, and I corrected that in my own reporting. So I'm no stranger to the idea that you have to journalism involves talking to unsavory people or people with
Right, right.
potentially dangerous ideas. I get that, but I think what that Tucker Carlson example drove home for me is if you believe that certain pundits, Tucker included, are espousing such dangerous rhetoric and sort of, influencing a segment of the population to do have very dangerous ideas or reckless beliefs, such as, say, anti-vax beliefs. If you believe that he is a node like that in the system, and that is causing, the foundations of our democracy to start to show some cracks, then you kind of need to treat that in your life, in your career, with that same level of alarm, right? And it's this idea of with something like a hyper object, having your actions sort of match your alarm. And we see this a lot with climate change, right? People are incredibly worried and anxious that, we only have certain amount of years to sort of save the planet. And yet people get on airplanes every day, right? They do all sorts of things and they don't change their lifestyles. And there's a bunch of debate around personal responsibility there,
Mm.
which I won't get into. But I see it as being almost analogous with the press corps, right? So if you are covering politics or covering, what's going on in Washington D.C. to whatever way, and you are constantly talking about democratic backsliding and this idea of, our democracy is in trouble, uh, then, cozying up to somebody who is perpetuating that, who is a major node of misinformation and whipping up unrest in that system. You can't just be having, friendly drinks or friendly phone calls with that person and using that. There has to be sort of, your actions have
Yeah.
to match your sense of worry. And I think that is where we're especially scrambled right now, both personally and as an industry.
I'm really tired of the word normalize, but this is one of those cases where, the problem is that when you treat Tucker Carlson as sort of just a normal guy, normal source, then you are normalizing him. This sentence that you wrote really jumped out at me. You wrote, "The disconnect between the threat Carlson poses and the political media's shrugging proximity to him fills me with a deep dread for my industry and a very real concern that it will not be able to rise to the challenge of our moment."
Mhm.
And that's strong stuff, and I agree, and I guess that's part of the scrambling is like, how do you deal with all of this? How do you deal with the fact that Fox News is now, pushing out stuff that you would have, it feels like 5 minutes ago, which is an obvious exaggeration. Anyone behaving this way would have been treated like a complete pariah. They would have
Mhm.
been drummed out of polite society, and now it's treated as, well, there's just another voice in our dialogue, and we're gonna go have beer with Tucker. Hey, so Charlie, I want to actually change gears and everything because I really you write about a lot of other stuff, and I really feel like I'm kind of short changing that. You and I could talk, I think, for hours here, and I want to make sure we get to that. So could we do that right after this? Thanks for listening to today's Bulwark podcast, and a special thank you to all of the Bulwark Plus members. We launched Bulwark Plus a year ago, and I don't think we really had any idea back then how fast it would grow or the kind of challenges we'd all be facing in the post Trump era. If you've been listening to us or reading our newsletters, the in depth pieces on our homepage, you know that we are committed to telling you what we think in a thoughtful, non tribal way. But we're also not going to pretend these are normal times, and we're not afraid to try to make a difference here at the Bulwark. And we intend to keep fighting because the challenges to democracy are more urgent than ever. None of this would be possible without your support, and we're very grateful. If you haven't signed up yet for Bulwark Plus, please consider becoming part of the Bulwark community. And if you already have, thanks. We think you're in great company. Okay, we are back with Charlie Warzel. You may know his work from the New York Times, from social media. He is also the author of the newsletter Galaxy Brain, which is really quite extraordinary. You must be having fun doing that. I mean,
Yeah, it's a blast.
it does feel like you're kind of liberated from some of the other stuff, and you're thinking things through. And that's what I really like about your newsletter, is that you're not pushing a line. You are genuinely trying to sort things out, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll be clear that I loved being at the New York
Yeah,
Times. I
yeah.
loved the platform. I loved a lot of the people, the institution. I have great total respect for. I wasn't canceled or anything, wasn't
Mhm.
trying to prove a point by going to
Yeah.
Substack. Only what I saw as an opportunity at Substack was this ability to do exactly what you just said, think through things sort of iteratively. I when you put a headline up and it's on the New York Times, front page, it's often relatively declarative, and it's often you have, I think, a responsibility to, especially in the op-ed page, to make an argument. And it's
Right.
not that there's no arguing at Galaxy Brain and there's no sort of, declarative sentences. But what I really wanted to do for at least this period of my career, in this sort of transition moment between, a Trump administration and a Biden administration and whatever's gonna, come down the road, is really work through my own mental models of a lot of things in the world, right? Including the ones that we've just been talking about, this sense of alarm, and how does the media environment, help or hurt that? I felt myself wanting to write pieces that didn't have easy, thesis statements or things like that. And this is sort of the best way I know how to do that thinking in public for other people to see.
So this may seem like we're changing topics here, but yesterday I was reading one of the I think it was a story in the Washington Post about how economists just cannot figure out why people are not coming back to work, and this is creating a huge political problem. And it may actually be the one thing that determines the fate of the Biden administration, the fact that you have even with dropping of the unemployment benefits, etc. People are quitting their jobs at a massive rate. The
Mhm.
workforce continues to be slower. People are rethinking their relationship to their jobs, to their careers, working at home, going back. And this is exactly what you're working on right now.
Mhm.
So, it does feel like we have all these other things that we're talking about, but in terms of tectonic changes in culture, our relationship to work, it feels like something huge is going on right now. Tell me what you see, how you think about this.
Yeah. So the big issue right now is I think the labor statistic of quits, right? That
Yeah.
there are more people quitting their jobs than have in quite a while. And, as you mentioned, with unemployment benefits, ending, people aren't coming back in the way that I think both economists and politicians and managers and executives thought that they would. And there's, a number of reasons for that, including the fact that a lot of people were actually able to save, and are even people sort of with lower wage jobs are kind of flush with cash right now in a way that they weren't before. So they have a little bit of economic or bargaining power, so to speak, to wait things out. And one of the things they're waiting out is low wages. But I think that is almost, that's something we're going to see change a little bit. But what's actually really interesting to me is this broader trend, which is, I described it in a past newsletter as career skepticism.
Mhm.
And this is something that you're seeing a lot more in the millennial cohort, and some of the oldest of Gen Z, who are just coming into the workforce. And what you're seeing is a group of people who have watched as their parents, or maybe grandparents, have worked really really hard and been just hit with these recessions that have wiped out a lot of savings, uh and this sort of constant rolling back of employee benefits. And what they're kind of seeing is this raw deal, right? I watched people work really, really hard all the time, sort of put off their lives for work in order to have this small period of retirement at the end. And now that period is being pushed later and later into life. And I think you're seeing people say, well, I don't really want that for myself, right? And so there's this kind of powerful idea that is just, sort of simmering across this sort of generational cohort that says, maybe I don't want a quote unquote career. And
Mm.
by career, I mean working, constantly climbing a very specific ladder to get to different, success levels, in order to build just enough stability to have the last, 10 years of your life to
Or
do
or
the things you want
or
to
or
do.
or thinking of your life as your job. I mean, that's
Right.
a career where you begin, "What is my life? My life is my career," and then there's this personal life. There seems to be kind of an inversion there. Like, what is my real life? What do I want my life to be?
Exactly. And I think, as with so many things, the pandemic is responsible for, you know, sort of shaking people out of this, whatever slumber that they might have been in, and making people realize, a, life is short, right? You could go at any minute. It's unexpected. You shouldn't be, deferring living your life to this, very specific point. But I also think too, we this is just a symptom of a very broken, especially very American work culture, in which, you know we have a book coming out on this, but I've talked to hundreds of people in the knowledge work sector over the last 2 or 3 years. And the theme, the trend that runs through this is that people are so burned out, and it's the result of corporations kind of
Huh.
taking this short-term approach, right? Instead of the long term of, hey, we want to keep you, retain you, give you the benefits. We have a long-term vision for our company and where we want to be, and you're a part of it for the long haul. There's this very sort of quarterly profit driven, shareholder driven idea of growth that companies and businesses are obsessed with. And what that's doing is that's working people to the bone. They are exhausted, they are tired. So many people have made work their life. And I think that there's going to be some sort of big rewards, or they'll get to the next, rung on the productivity chain or their career, and they can, slow down, but there's no slowing down anywhere. So I think this has been going on, for 20 years or so now, at
Sure.
least, with, especially with like the internet supercharging the economy and sort of our capitalistic ways. And I believe that this is just kind of the chickens coming home to roost here. Like, people are just tired. They've kind of had enough. And
Well,
what's
and they also don't feel any sense of loyalty. I mean, there once was a time when companies were paternalistic and they were loyal to their employees, and employees were loyal to them, and that's like a distant memory right now. And once employees realized that the loyalty was only supposed to go one way, it was like, well, screw that.
it's incredibly interesting to have gone through. I went through a lot of the history of this, and there's, from the 50s, there's a wonderful book by William White called The Organization
Yep.
Man, and it speaks to that, right? The organization man was a company man, and these companies, built such an infrastructure that some of them actually built suburbs.
Yeah.
The suburbs were kind of created to be the sort of second company, area of life. But there was this, a lot of these people really subsumed their lives for their companies, and then with the sort of precarity and recessions in the 70s and 80s, all those people then got laid off, and
Yeah.
then that created a sense of kind of disloyalty or distrust of companies that really hasn't been regained since.
Yeah, you can't turn it on and off, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
can't turn the switches on and off.
Yeah, and so I mean, I see this as for older workers, there's just burnout, right? There's just exhaustion, and the pandemic obviously did not help that, with people being trapped at home, to sort of homeschooling their kids over Zoom, and uh, all those frustrations boiling over. But then there's the secondary part of the career skepticism, and this younger generation coming up and sort of seeing that old way and saying, "Well, that looks terrible.
Yeah.
Do I really want that?" And what's so crucial about this, what gets lost, and I really want to be clear on it, is that in almost every situation, again, I've talked to hundreds of people about this quitting and everything, it gets very, enmeshed with laziness, or, being entitled or spoiled or anything. People that I talk to a person, want to work. They
Hmm.
get a sense of dignity
Mhm.
from work. They enjoy it. It's a meaningful part of people's lives. What they don't want is to have, their entire life flattened into one dimension,
Mhm.
and that is, I am an employee of this company, I do this. And so I think there's actually, where we kind of go in the book, is there's an incredible amount of opportunity there for companies to provide, provide that dignity, provide that paycheck, obviously, and give people the ability to create three-dimensional lives. And what they will get out of it is dedicated, loyal, productive, energized, creative employees. And I think that that's overlooked.
Yeah, I mean, the term, work-life balance is kind of a cliche, but it's very obvious that there is this shift. And I think Americans have mocked the French for a long time for valuing leisure time. I'm not saying that we're going to become more like France necessarily, but the French clearly understood something that Americans are now, I think, grasping in a different way.
Yeah, there's some unbelievable research, there's a great book that I would recommend everyone reading by the science writer Annie Murphy Paul. It's called The Extended Mind, and it talks about how basically we talk about our brains as if they're computers, right? Well, our brains aren't computers. Our brains are actually very different. A computer can do the same task anywhere at any time, and it's distinctively not human. The human mind works so much differently, and actually depends on the environment. And where I'm going with this is she and all this science basically concludes that a lot of the things that we do to be more productive, that we sort of venerate, and grit and determination and sitting at the keyboard and banging your head against the wall till it comes out, it's actually the opposite of how our brains want to function. And taking time away, sort of rest, relaxation, disconnection, is actually incredibly generative, creatively, and for problem solving and things like that. And our work culture doesn't allow for that a lot of the times. So what it does is it really does kind of grind people down and burn them out. And there's actually so much productivity, creativity that's being left on the table because of that.
Charlie Warzel, this has been a fascinating discussion. I hope we can do it again because I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We'll be back tomorrow and we'll do this all over again.